Hi everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel Dr. Srinivas Medical Concepts and my FB page Dr. Srinivas Concepts. This is Dr. Srinivas, a neurologist from Rajahmundry, Andhra Pradesh, India. I am also the medical author of the book Focused Neurology. Today we are going to talk about a very interesting and exciting concept, the neurology consultation, the fundamental concepts of history taking. History taking. Sir William Osler said, just listen to the patient. He is telling you the diagnosis. So attentive listening to the patient is of paramount importance to make a diagnosis. Give the patient's own words in the complaint. The history is the cornerstone of medical diagnosis, especially neurogenic disorders like headache, epilepsy, sleep disorders. The neurologic history begins with the demographic data, handedness, chief complaint, and presenting illness. The temporal profile of the illness. It is important to determine the precise time of appearance and progression of the symptoms in a chronological order. The rapid onset of a neurologic complaint occurring within a seconds or minutes usually indicates a vascular event, seizure, or migraine. The rapid onset of a neurologic complaint. It could be vascular trauma or seizure or migraine. An abrupt onset with variable degrees of recovery. There could be sudden loss of function and negative symptoms like weakness, numbness, and aphasia, which suggest CVA. If there is transient remission or regression, it indicates the process is more of ischemic rather than hemorrhagic. In seizure, unlike vascular where there are negative symptoms, in seizure there are positive symptoms. There could be involuntary movements, tingling sensation of sudden onset. In migraine, a slower temporal march of symptoms of headache, nausea, and visual disturbance occurs. So whenever the history is of a rapid onset, we have to think of vascular, trauma, seizure, and migraine. But if the temporal profile is of subacute onset of a neurologic complaint, then the diagnosis would be infection or inflammation. In infection, there is progressive symptoms associated with systemic manifestations of fever, neck stiffness, and altered sensorium. If there is inflammation like multiple sclerosis, there is relapsing and remitting symptoms involving different levels of the nervous system. But in neurodegenerative conditions, it's going to be very slowly progressive symptoms without remission, which are characteristic of neurodegenerative disorders and neoplasms. History of present illness. So the moment a person makes a complaint, we have to go in for details of the present illness. History of present illness. Higher functions. Always evaluate the patient in accordance with education and social status. Whether he is attentiveness, talks logically and coherently. In the speech, whether the comprehension is good, repetition is good, and fluency is good, and memory with recollection of events, are they good? When there is a complaint of motor system involvement, we need to ask and we need to know whether the proximal muscles are involved or distal muscles are involved. If proximal muscles are involved, there will be difficulty in combing the hair. If the distal muscles are involved, there will be difficulty in buttoning the buttons. History of present illness, sensory system. How do we ask history of touch? If the person is able to appreciate one's own clothes, that means his touch sensation is intact. Pain. If there is pain producing injuries like pinprick, whether it is appreciated. Position joint sense. If the person falls when he closes eyes during face wash. Generally, three systems are responsible for our balance. One ocular, second vestibular, third is posterior column, proprioception. If two of the three systems are intact, person is able to balance. But if more than two systems are affected, then the person falls. For example, if a person has got problem with proprioception, he is still able to balance. But the moment he closes his eyes, even if the second system is also gone, he falls down. So position joint sense, if the person falls when he closes eyes during face wash. Temperature, whether the person is able to feel hot water when he takes bath. The history of autonomic nervous system, whether the person feels giddy when he gets up from lying to standing position, or if there's any history of diarrhea or constipation or erectile dysfunction in males. Past medical history. In the past medical history, we need to know whether the person is having diabetes, hypertension or dyslipidemia, because these three predisposes a person to develop cerebrovascular accident. We need to know the past history of valvular heart disease, which can cause cerebral abscess. History of bleeding and clotting disorders can give rise to cerebral hemorrhage. The person may be having bleeding disorders or clotting disorders like hemophilia, then the person is prone to develop cerebral hemorrhage. If the person has got history of AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, he is more prone to develop lymphoma or toxoplasmosis. The past history of malignancy has to be asked because malignancy can lead on to metastasis or paraneoplastic disorders. We need to ask the history of collagen vascular disease because it can cause dissection of carotid arteries or subarachnoid hemorrhage. Endocrinopathy's history is important because dysthyroid states can give rise to a lot of neurological complications. If there's history of trauma, then it could be subdural hematoma where there is venous leak or extradural hematoma where there is an arterial bleed or torrential bleed. Extradural hematoma is because of the middle meningeal artery rupture, so there will be a torrential bleed and immediately a neurosurgeon has to be called upon and the hematoma has to be drained. Subdural hematoma is a venous leak, so even a trivial head injury, especially in old persons, can cause subdural hematoma. It will go on for few months and person may even develop memory loss, dementia. In fact, one of the treatable cause of dementia is subdural hematoma. So if a person has got dementia and then history suggests of subdural hematoma, the moment a neurosurgeon is called and hematoma is drained, his memory comes back to normal. History of gastric surgery for vitamin B12 deficiency. Guillain-Barré syndrome. A person who's having Guillain-Barré syndrome, we should always ask history of diarrheal illness prior to an episode of Guillain-Barré syndrome. If a person has got neuralgic amyotrophy, person may be having immunization which might have precipitated neuralgic amyotrophy. Likewise, if a person has got myelopathy, a spinal cord lesion, we should always ask history of past visual loss because this could lead to multiple sclerosis. Now, having got the history, we need to focus on personal history. Smoking and alcoholism gives rise to cerebrovascular accident. In women, we should always ask history regarding menstruation because persons may have catamenial epilepsy which occurs in particular phases of menstruation, or they may get headache during menstruation. In pregnancy, persons who are pregnant, there's a predisposition for arterial stroke because of increase of procoagulant factors. Whereas in postpartum state, there is a predisposition to venous stroke because of decrease in anticoagulant factors. We need to ask sexual history for HIV and neurosyphilis. Vegetarians and vegetarianism can give rise to vitamin B12 deficiency. Geographical location. Some areas they are prone to develop multiple sclerosis. Some countries like India, there could be a predisposition to tuberculosis. We should always ask history of drug history and toxin exposure because Aminoglycosides may give rise to neuromuscular junction disorders like myasthenia gravis. It can cause ototoxicity like dizziness. Vincristine can cause peripheral neuropathy. Immune suppressants like cyclosporin can cause encephalopathy. Vitamin A can cause pseudotumor cerebri, or vitamin B6 pyridoxine can cause peripheral neuropathy. Proton pump inhibitors can cause headache. Anticholinergic drugs can cause confusion. Family history is also very important in neurology consultation, especially in terms of Huntington's disease, Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, multiple sclerosis, migraine, epilepsy, hypertension, diabetes mellitus, which can run in families, neurofibromatosis, Wilson's disease, and mitochondrial diseases. History of other systems with neurologic relevance. Not only neurology, nervous system per se, we need to ask history of other systems which may have neurologic relevance, like face. If a person has got deviation of the angle of the mouth, it could be seventh nerve palsy, upper motor neuron type, where only the lower part of the face is involved. If the person also has got inability to close the eyes, that is the upper part of the face is involved, it could be lower motor neuron type of seventh nerve palsy. If a person has history of pain over the face, we should suspect trigeminal neuralgia or the fifth nerve involvement. Regarding headache, if a person has headache, it could be meningitis, subarachnoid hemorrhage, tumor, migraine, or hemorrhage with raised intracranial tension. Cerebral hemorrhage per se does not produce headache because brain does not have pain receptors. Even if the brain is cut, there is no pain. It is only the meninges and the vessels in the meninges which are pain sensitive, and therefore only when the meninges or meningeal vessels get involved, person will have pain, like meningeal involvement in meningitis, subarachnoid hemorrhage where the arachnoid membrane is involved, tumor because the raised intracranial tension, it can go and impinge on the meninges, and migraine because of the trigeminal-vascular system and the meninges being affected. Eyes, we should always get a good history of eyes and vision, because if there is a history of scintillating scotoma or photosensitivity, it could be migraine. If there is eye pain, it could be optic neuritis. If a person has got ptosis, it could be myasthenia gravis. If a person has got episodic visual loss, it could be amaurosis fugax. A person's loss of vision will be coming from upwards to downwards as if a curtain is falling down. It suggests that the internal carotid artery is involved. The ophthalmic branch of the internal carotid artery is involved, and he is likely to develop ischemic stroke because of the carotid stenosis. So amaurosis fugax or episodic visual loss is a warning sign for the development of ischemic stroke. If a person has got progressive visual loss, we need to think of optic neuropathy. If a person has got double vision, it could be third nerve, fourth nerve, or sixth nerve palsy. If the third nerve is involved, third nerve causes medial rectus contraction, that is adduction. So if the third nerve is involved, they'll have double vision on looking at near objects. Sixth nerve is responsible for lateral rectus and abduction. So if the sixth nerve is involved, they'll have double vision on looking at far off objects. If fourth nerve is involved, superior oblique, they'll have vertical diplopia. So double vision could be even in CVA because of ischemic stroke in the brainstem. Diabetes mellitus also can affect the cranial nerves, the third nerve. One important differentiating feature between diabetes mellitus affecting third nerve and aneurysm posterior communicating artery affecting third nerve is that in diabetic third nerve palsy, it affects the center of the third nerve, whereas the pupillary fibers, the parasympathetic fibers are peripherally placed. And therefore, in diabetic third nerve palsy, the center of the third nerve is affected. The parasympathetic pupillary fibers are spared. So it is a pupillary sparing third nerve palsy. Whereas if it is aneurysm, PCOM aneurysm, it comes and impinges on the top of the third nerve. So the first part to get affected in the third nerve is the parasympathetic pupillary fibers. So the pupil being affected is the first sign in a PCOM aneurysm. So in diabetes mellitus, it is a pupillary sparing third nerve involvement, whereas PCOM aneurysm or any extraneous compression, it is a pupillary involving third nerve palsy. It could be trauma. Myasthenia gravis also can cause double vision because it is a neuromuscular junction disorder of skeletal muscle. So how do we differentiate whether it is a cranial nerve palsy causing double vision or myasthenia gravis causing double vision? Myasthenia gravis is a neuromuscular junction of a skeletal muscle, and therefore pupil, which is a smooth muscle, is not at all involved. So in myasthenia gravis, they may have double vision, but pupil is normal. Whereas in cranial nerve palsy, there could be double vision as well as the pupil being affected. Ear. The important points in ear is that if there is hearing loss, we have to think of acoustic neuroma. Vertigo, it indicates vestibulopathy. Tinnitus, it could be Meniere's disease. If the person has got vesicles, it could be herpes zoster. Nose. Anosmia, loss of smell, is very common in olfactory group meningioma, especially trauma. Always head injury, we should ask history of loss of smell because loss of smell or anosmia is very common in head injury. If there is head injury, there could be discharge from the nose. CSF rhinorrhea may be there. How do we differentiate CSF rhinorrhea from the mucus secretion from the nose? If it is CSF, obviously the sugar will be there. Neck. If there is neck stiffness, we have to think of meningitis and subarachnoid hemorrhage. If there is pain, we have to think of radiculopathy. Cardiovascular system. The important points of history in cardiovascular system is that if there is arrhythmia, it can lead on to cerebral embolism. If there is hypertension, it can give rise to cerebrovascular action, both hemorrhage and infarction. In fact, if the hemorrhage is seen in putamen, pons, thalamus and cerebellum, it is a hypertensive bleed. Hypertension also predisposes to atherosclerosis and can cause infarction. If there is a history of claudication pain. What is claudication pain? A person initially may be able to walk 10 meters, after which he develops pain. But subsequently, after walking 5 meters, he develops pain. Then 2 meters, he develops pain. So the distance, the pain which is produced on walking slowly comes down. The distance becomes smaller and smaller and the pain increases. This is known as claudication pain and claudication distance. We can see this condition, the claudication pain, in both neurogenic conditions and vascular conditions. Neurogenic, in lumbar canal stenosis, you can get neurogenic claudication. Vascular is peripheral vascular disease. There will be strong history of smoking. Lumbar canal stenosis, the pain can get relieved if a person flexes as if cycling. When there's a flexion, the lumbar canal, the diameter increases and therefore the pain comes down. So very important history. Myocardial infarction can give rise to ischemic stroke. We should always check out on the carotid bruit, which can cause ischemic stroke because of carotid artery stenosis. Respiratory system, we need to ask history of tuberculosis because it can give rise to meningitis. The breathlessness may be because of the respiratory impairment, respiratory muscle impairment, like neuromuscular junction disorder, myasthenia gravis, or Guillain-Barré syndrome, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Asthma can give rise to systemic vasculitis. The history of other systems with neurologic relevance are gastrointestinal. If there is an excessive thirst, it could be diabetes mellitus or diabetes insipidus. If a person has got vomiting, it could be raised intracranial tension. If a person has got constipation or diarrhea, it could be dysautonomia because of diabetes mellitus. In genitourinary, we should ask history of urinary incontinence or urinary retention, which is suggestive of neurogenic bladder. If a person has got erectile dysfunction, it could be dysautonomia, diabetes mellitus. In fact, one of the early signs of diabetic autoneuropathy in men is loss of early morning erections. If there is polyuria, it could be diabetes mellitus or diabetes insipidus. If there is history of recurrent spontaneous abortions, we should consider the possibility of antiphospholipid syndrome. Menstrual history is important in terms of catamenial epilepsy or headache. The person may be taking oral contraceptives which can predispose to stroke. Endocrine system. Diabetes mellitus can cause neuropathy or ischemic stroke. Thyroid, hypothyroidism can cause neuropathy or myopathy. The musculoskeletal system and skin, the history with neurologic relevance are spine and foot, scoliosis and pes cavus, which we see in hereditary neuropathy. In hereditary neuropathy, we see scoliosis and pes cavus because hereditary neuropathy or long-standing neuropathy will cause unequal weakness of the foot muscles or paravertebral muscles. Because of the unequal weakness of the paravertebral muscles, there could be scoliosis. Because of unequal weakness of the foot muscles, there could be pes cavus. If there is history of muscle pain, we have to think of myositis, that is inflammatory muscle disease, polymyositis or dermatomyositis. If a person has got proximal muscle weakness, it is more in favor of myopathy. They'll have especially difficulty in getting up from squatting to the standing position. They climb on themselves to get up. This is known as Gower sign, which we characteristically see in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. If a person has got distal muscle weakness, we have to suspect neuropathy because it's a length-dependent neuropathy. The axonal neuropathy is a length-dependent neuropathy, unlike demyelinating neuropathy, which is length-independent neuropathy. So in axonal neuropathy, it's a length-dependent neuropathy. So the distal parts get affected more. So there's distal muscle weakness. If there are birthmarks on the skin, we have to think of neurocutaneous disorders. Why neurological disorders can cause skin impairment? Because both the nervous system and skin, they originate from ectoderm. Since ectoderm gives rise to both the nervous system as well as skin, the nervous system can get affected along with the skin, and therefore we need to look always at the skin manifestations when we are dealing with nervous system, the neurocutaneous markers. Hematopoietic system. If there are bleeding disorders, and especially if there's bleeding from mucosal surfaces, gums, vagina and rectum, we have to think of drugs which affect the platelets and cause bleeding disorders like aspirin and other antiplatelet agents. If a person has got clotting disorder, that is bleeding into muscles and joints, we have to think a clotting disorder like hemophilia, which can give rise to cerebral hemorrhage. Anemia can give rise to, vitamin B12 deficiency can give rise to anemia, as well as subacute combined degeneration. Vitamin B12 is especially important for myelination. Of the three important tracts, that is posterior column, pyramidal tract and spinothalamic tract, pyramidal tract and posterior column are well myelinated tracts, where the spinothalamic tract is least myelinated tract. So in vitamin B12 deficiency, posterior column and pyramidal tract, which are well myelinated, they get affected because vitamin B12 is essential for myelination. So subacute combined degeneration causes symptomatology of posterior column and pyramidal tract involvement. If there's history of psychiatric manifestation forthcoming, like visual hallucinations, we have to think of Lewy body dementia. If there's history of auditory hallucinations, we have to think of schizophrenia or alcoholism. If there is Capgras syndrome, what is Capgras syndrome? A mistaken identity. They will think a known person as an imposter. We see this condition in Alzheimer's dementia. If a person has got grandiose ideas, a person may be poor, but he thinks he is a rich person. If he gets such grandiose ideas, we have to think of tertiary syphilis, that is neurosyphilis. Right, now let me talk about neurologic consultation in common disorders which we encounter in neurology. Stroke, headache, epilepsy, vertigo, neck pain. These are the common neurological conditions which we see. So when we are asked for a neurologic consultation for these disorders, what is the history we need to ask to arrive at a diagnosis? If a neurologist is consulted for stroke, we should ask about negative symptoms like weakness, sensory, speech, and they are sudden in onset. And we should always ask history of hypertension, diabetes mellitus, dyslipidemia, coronary artery disease, peripheral vascular disease, smoking, and alcoholism. Suppose a neurologic consultation is sought for headache. How are we going to approach? The three most common causes of headache are migraine, cluster headache, and tension type headache. Whenever we approach a person with headache, whenever a neurologic consultation is asked for headache, we see whether it is a primary headache where there is no cause and secondary headache where there is a definitive cause. Secondary headache we can rule out by taking CT scan head or doing LPCSF for infections or tumor or hemorrhage. So in the CT scan, head and CSF is normal and there's no definitive cause forthcoming, the complaint being only headache and no other complaints, then it is a primary headache. The three common causes of primary headache are migraine, cluster headache and tension type headache. 80% of the headache we need not worry because they are primary headache. In migraine, it could be unilateral headache, hemicranial, associated with GI disturbances like vomiting. In fact, the classic migraine, they'll have migraine with aura. That is, they'll have visual symptoms, scotoma, fortification spectra and neurologic accompaniment. In migraine, they usually seek relief by lying quietly in a dark and quiet environment. Unlike cluster headache where they keep pacing about to get relief of headache. So migraine persons quietly lie down in a dark and quiet environment to seek relief. Cluster headache they tend to have unilateral, non-pulsatile orbitofrontal headache, orbitofrontal pain without GI, visual or neurologic accompaniment. They tend to get relief by moving about. Tension type headache. Tension type headache, in fact, it is a headache without any neurologic accompaniments. To put it very simply, how do we differentiate tension type headache from migraine? Migraine is a headache with neurologic accompaniments. Tension type headache is a headache without neurologic accompaniments. So they tend to have bilateral headache, band-like, non-pulsatile, without GI, visual or neurologic accompaniment. If the neurologic consultation is asked for epilepsy, we would like to know the body position, whether in body position is unrelated in epilepsy. Unlike syncope, which occurs on standing, we need to ask history of tonic-clonic activity, whether it is focal or generalized, whether there is tongue bite incontinence, whether there is post-ictal confusion or deficit. Post-ictal confusion and deficit is highly suggestive of epilepsy because in syncope they do not have post-ictal confusion or post-ictal deficit. Suppose a neurologic consultation is asked for vertigo, we should ask about the relation to the body position. Benign positional paroxysmal vertigo. BPPV is the very common condition causing vertigo. It is because of the movement of the otolith. So when a person keeps changing the position, the otolith also keeps changing the position. So it precipitates a severe vertigo. So we should ask the history of vertigo in terms of positional changes. If it is peripheral vertigo, there will be peripheral signs like nausea, vomiting, tinnitus, headache, hearing loss, and VOR dysfunction, vestibulo-ocular dysfunction, because the vestibular connection with the PPRF on the opposite side, if it gets affected, they'll have VOR dysfunction. We can make it out by head impulse test. When we ask to look at an object, at a finger and turn the head, generally we'll be able to turn the head with the eyes still focusing on the finger. But if a person has got peripheral vertigo, the eyes also will turn with the head and they have to make a corrective saccade. So if we see a corrective saccade when we are trying to elicit the head impulse test, we can be happy because it's a peripheral vertigo. We need not worry. Central vertigo is dangerous. It could be hemorrhage or infarction in the brainstem. So obviously they'll have weakness, numbness, diplopia, dysarthria, dysphagia. One of the common causes, one of the common central cause of vertigo is Wallenberg syndrome or the lateral medullary syndrome. Suppose the neurologic consultation is asked for neck pain, backache and hand numbness. We have to, especially neck pain and backache, we have to suspect radiculopathy, which gets aggravated by cough. If it is cervical radiculopathy, the pain radiates below the elbow and the pain occurs with the movement of the neck. If it is lumbar radiculopathy, there will be weakness and sensory disturbance in the involved territory. If it is carpal tunnel syndrome, they will have especially nocturnal symptoms in the night. It is because of the median nerve compression. So, finally, what are the key points in history taking? The most important point of history taking is attentive listening. We have to attentively listen to the patient to arrive at a proper diagnosis. So when a neurologic consultation is made, the most important point is attentive listening. In fact, Sir William Osler has quoted, quote, "Just listen to the patient, he is telling you the diagnosis," unquote, William Osler. If there is sudden onset followed by improvement with variable degrees of recovery, it is trauma or vascular. If it is subacute onset, it is infection or inflammation. If it is chronic, we have to think of degenerative or chronic infections. If it is relapsing and remitting type, we have to think of demyelinative conditions. I have enjoyed giving to this lecture. I hope you have enjoyed also listening to this lecture. If you have any doubt or suggestion, kindly post on to my YouTube channel, but please like and subscribe my YouTube channel, Dr. Srinivas Medical Concepts, and my FB page, Dr. Srinivas Concepts. Thank you. Bye.